They put her suitcase on the porch at 9:17 on a Thursday night in November, and the porch light was off, and she could see her own breath. Nkechi Okafor was 17 years old. She had a suitcase that was not really a suitcase. It was a large zip bag, the kind with wheels that had stopped rolling smoothly sometime in 2006. The kind you dragged rather than pulled. It held everything she owned in the world: 2 school uniforms, a winter coat her mother had bought her from a charity shop on Rye Lane in Peckham for £12 2 winters ago, a notebook she had been filling with numbers since she was 14, and a small tin box that had once held biscuits and now held a photograph, a folded letter, and £43 in mixed notes and coins that she had been saving from the school lunch allowance for 8 months. The door closed behind her with a click that was worse than a slam. Inside, she could hear the television. She could hear her stepfather, Douglas Nwosu, telling her mother that this was the right thing, and her mother not answering in the way that meant she had already been through this argument and lost it. Nkechi stood on the porch for 2 minutes. Then she picked up the zip bag, pressed the tin box against her chest through the fabric of her coat, and walked down the path to the street. She did not look back. Not because she wasn't afraid, because she already knew that the only direction that held anything for her was forward, and looking back would cost her something she could not afford to spend. 15 years later, she walked back through a different door. Not the door to the house on Tiverton Road in Peckham, the door to the 3rd-floor conference room at a firm called Nwosu and Partners Commercial Brokerage, headquartered in a low grey building on the edge of the Canary Wharf development in East London. The room held 5 people. Douglas Nwosu was one of them. He did not recognize her immediately. She had grown into herself in the 15 years since the porch. She was 32 now, 5'7", wearing a charcoal suit that had been made for her by a tailor on Savile Row she had used exactly once. Because once was enough to understand that the right clothes were not about vanity. They were about not giving anyone an excuse to look somewhere other than your face. Her hair was pulled back. She carried a single folder, dark blue, and placed it on the table without opening it. She looked at Douglas Nwosu across the table, and she said, "Hello, Douglas," and something in his face went very still. Nkechi Adaize Okafor had been born in 1990 in Southwark, South London, to a mother named Constance, who had come to England from Enugu at 23 on a student visa, and had stayed. The way people stay, not all at once but in increments, each year making the departure seem less urgent than the one before. Her father had died when Nkechi was 9, a Tuesday, a hospital ward, a face that was her face but older and already leaving. She remembered the sound of the ward at night, the particular silence of machines that had been switched off, her mother's hand, very cold. Douglas Nwosu had entered their lives when Nkechi was 11. He was a broad man, not unkind in the early years, with opinions about most things, and the habit of stating them as though they were the conclusions of a committee rather than the impulses of one person. He sold commercial property on commission, had done for 12 years by the time he met Constance, and he carried the confidence of a man who believed that the ability to sell something to someone who had not been looking for it was the highest of all human skills. He did not know what to do with Nkechi. This was the whole truth of it, without drama. She was not his. She was her father's daughter in a way that declared itself, in the set of her jaw, in her habit of writing things down, in the way she sat at the kitchen table after school, doing her homework, with the concentration of someone who understood that education was not optional for her in the way it might be optional for someone else. He would have tolerated this if she had been quiet about it. She was not quiet about it. Not loudly. She never raised her voice in that house. Not once in 6 years. But she was present in a way that Douglas found inconvenient, and when Nkechi was 16, and her school wrote a letter to the house saying she had been accepted into a fast-track program at a college in the city, Douglas read the letter first and placed it on the kitchen counter without mentioning it. Nkechi found the letter 3 days later under a dishcloth. She recognized immediately that it had been read. The fold was different, and she recognized equally what that meant. She did not confront Douglas about it. She called the college herself and confirmed her place. She told her mother that evening at the kitchen sink, quietly, when Douglas was in the other room watching television. Her mother said, "That's wonderful." Her voice was the voice of a woman saying the right thing in the right direction, while looking at a wall she could not see over. The letter that had been under the dishcloth became the first item she put in the tin box. The next year, Douglas lost a large commercial contract, the third significant loss in 18 months, and the mood in the house on Tiverton Road changed the way weather changes when a front is coming. He began to work later. He began to talk less. He began to look at Nkechi's college program, her college friends, her college future, in a way that was specific and cold. The way a man looks at something he has decided to find a reason to remove. He found the reason on a Thursday evening in November after a phone call from the college that he intercepted, involving a weekend trip he had not approved and had not been asked to approve because Nkechi was 17 and had not thought to ask. He told her to pack. She packed. She was done in 11 minutes. The tin box was already in her bag. Her mother stood at the bedroom door while Nkechi zipped the bag, and did not stop her, and Nkechi understood this, not then, not that night, but later, after enough years had passed that she could see it for what it was, a woman held in place by forces that Nkechi could not yet name, and her mother could not yet leave. She had stopped blaming her mother the year she turned 24. She had stopped needing to blame her altogether the year she turned 28. But that came later. On that Thursday night she was 17, and the door closed behind her, and the porch light was off, and there was nothing in any direction except forward. She slept on a friend's sofa for 6 weeks. The friend was a girl from school named Amma, whose mother, a large warm woman named Nana, who smelled of coconut oil and cooked in quantities appropriate for a family twice the actual size of the household, had taken one look at Nkechi on her doorstep with the zip bag and said, "Come in. You're staying until you're sorted." She had not asked for an explanation. She had simply handed Nkechi a bowl of soup and pointed at the sofa. The sofa had a spring that pressed into the left side of your back if you lay on your right. Nkechi lay on her left. She slept with the tin box on the carpet beside her head. She attended college every day without exception, wearing the same 3 outfits in rotation, spending 43 pounds so precisely that by the time she left Nana's sofa for a room in a shared house near Elephant and Castle, she had spent 31 and saved the rest. She had found the room through the college notice board. It cost £220 a month, including bills, which was not possible on what she had, which meant she needed income, which meant she needed work, which she found by walking into every shop, cafe, and office within 800 meters of the college and asking. The third place she tried, a small accountancy firm on Bunhill Row whose receptionist position had not yet been advertised anywhere, hired her for 16 hours a week at minimum wage to answer phones, manage files, and do whatever else needed doing. She was, from the first week, better at the work than the job description suggested she should be. She understood numbers, had understood them since her father's record-keeping notebooks, which had been part of his estate, and which she had read at 12 with a concentration of someone who senses that a language being spoken is one they are meant to know. By the 3rd month at the accountancy firm, she was doing work that was not strictly within her job description, and the senior partner, a man named Gerald Bright, who wore the same navy tie every day and who had a habit of testing junior staff with questions he already knew the answers to, had noticed. He called her into his office on a Tuesday in March. "How old are you?" he said. 17, she said. "What are you studying?" she told him. He wrote it down. He had a yellow legal pad and a specific way of writing, very fast, not looking at the page, that told Nkechi he had been writing things down most of his adult life. "When you finish," he said, "come and see me." She said she would. She meant it. She filed that conversation in the same place she filed everything that mattered, in the notebook, which by this point had 47 pages of figures, patterns, and observations about how money moved through systems, and where it slowed, and why. If this story is already making your chest feel something it hasn't felt in a while, subscribe, because what Nkechi builds in the next 12 years, and what she walks back into that conference room to do, is something Douglas Nwosu had 15 years to see coming, and never once looked up to notice. She qualified at 23 with a first-class degree in finance and a postgraduate certificate in commercial property investment she had studied for in the evenings while working full-time at Gerald Bright's firm, where she had been full-time since she was 18, and where, by 22, she was running the analysis on transactions that had the firm's name on them, but her thinking inside them. Gerald Bright paid her well and told her the truth, which were the two things she had been looking for, and which she had learned, from the house on Tiverton Road, were rarer than people admitted. She left Gerald Bright's firm at 26 to join a boutique commercial property advisory group in the city. She was the youngest person by 8 years. She was the only black woman. She had been both things before, and she treated the distinction the way she treated most obstacles, as information about the room she was in, not as information about what she was capable of. She made her first independent deal at 28, a distressed commercial property in Bermondsey that she had identified, evaluated, and structured a buyer for over a period of 4 months, working the analysis in her kitchen at the table after dinner, in the same posture she had held at the kitchen table in Peckham at 14, with the same concentration, the same notebook, different numbers. She made £62,000 from that deal. She put $40,000 into the next one. By 31, she had a track record that fit on one page, but was dense enough that the people who read it twice. She had a small number of loyal clients, not many, because she had been selective in a way that had frustrated more than one person who wanted her to move faster than she believed the analysis warranted. She had a reputation for not being wrong, not for being lucky, for doing the work that made luck unnecessary. She had also, by 31, been watching the commercial brokerage market in South London and East London for 4 years, with a specific interest in firms that had the client relationships of a mid-sized player, but the operational structure of a much smaller one. Firms that were undervalued, specifically because the person running them had built them on personal relationships and not on systems, which meant that the value was sitting in one person's Rolodex rather than in anything a buyer could rely on. She had a list of 5 such firms, and Nwosu & Partners was third on the list. She had not put it on the list because of Douglas. She had put it on the list because of the numbers. But she would be dishonest with herself, and Nkechi Okafor was many things, but dishonest with herself was not one of them. If she claimed that when she recognized the name, she felt nothing, she felt something. She sat with it for 2 days, the way she sat with a deal before committing, testing the feeling from different directions, asking herself whether it was interfering with the analysis. It was not interfering with the analysis. The analysis was sound independently. The feeling was something she could carry separately. She put it in the notebook. The notebook, by this point, was its 5th edition. The same small format as the original, the same handwriting that had been getting smaller and more precise for 15 years. She had kept every edition. The first 4 were in the tin box, which sat on a shelf in her flat in Bermondsey, still holding the photograph, the letter, and what had been £43, and was now nothing. Because she had spent the last of it on a meal the evening she signed her first deal, alone, at a restaurant she had walked past for a year imagining walking into. She commissioned the analysis on Nwosu and Partners in September. By December, it was complete. The picture it presented was exactly what she had expected. A firm that had been built on Douglas Nwosu's ability to move through a room and make people feel their interests were being managed. 31 years of that. A client list that was loyal, aging, and entirely unaware that the firm's systems were running on spreadsheets that hadn't been updated since 2015. 2 junior brokers who were both looking for exits. A lease on the Canary Wharf office that was up for renewal in 8 months. A man, 62 years old, whose commission income had been declining for 4 consecutive years and who had not yet told anyone. Not his bank, not his accountants, not, as far as she could determine, himself, what the next 5 years of that trend implied. She contacted his firm through a holding company she had structured for the purpose, using a name that was accurate in every legal particular and which contained nothing that would identify her until she chose to identify herself. The first meeting was in October. A preliminary introduction, a statement of interest, a review of the publicly available information. Douglas had not attended. He had sent one of the junior brokers, a young man named Tobena, who was clearly capable and clearly underpaid, and who had handled the meeting with the polite efficiency of someone who suspected the acquisition was real and was not going to be the reason it fell through. The second meeting was the one in January, the one with the full team, the one Douglas attended. She arrived at the building on the edge of Canary Wharf at 8:51 a.m. and took the lift to the 3rd floor and walked into the conference room at 8:58, 2 minutes before the meeting was scheduled. She had the dark blue folder. She had her charcoal suit. She had the reading of the room down to the width of a breath. Douglas Nwosu was already there. He was sitting at the far end of the table with the body of a man who still believed, at 62, that the ability to occupy a room was the same as the ability to own it. He was heavier than he had been. The confidence was the same but slower now, the way a machine sounds when it is running on older fuel. He had his hands flat on the table, and he was looking at the door when she walked through it. She said, "Hello, Douglas." 4 seconds passed. "Nkechi," he said. Her name in his mouth, after 15 years, had the sound of a man watching a door he thought he had closed open on its own. She sat down. She placed the folder on the table. She looked at him without hurry or heat. The way you look at something you have examined so thoroughly from a distance that the close view holds no surprises. His legal representative, a woman named Constance, not her mother, just the coincidence of names, shifted papers. The 2 junior brokers looked at the table. Tobena looked between Douglas and Nkechi with the expression of someone rapidly revising the story they had believed they were in. "Should we?" Douglas began. "Yes," said Nkechi. "Let's proceed." She opened the folder. The first document was the analysis, 41 pages, single-spaced, the result of 3 months of work that had consumed her evenings and her weekends, and had been. She admitted to herself only once, the most satisfying work she had ever done, not because of what it was about, but because it was the complete and total application of every skill she had spent 15 years building, aimed at a set of numbers that she had first encountered as a feeling on a porch in November, with her coat on and her breath visible, and nowhere to go. She walked them through it. All 41 pages. She had been told once by a senior colleague who meant it as a correction that she was thorough to the point of being intimidating. She had thanked him and continued being thorough. Douglas sat through the presentation with the careful stillness of a man who has realized, partway through, that the thing happening in the room is not what he had prepared for. His legal representative took notes. His junior brokers looked at the documents with the attention of people who recognized, in the detail and the precision of the analysis, that the firm they worked for was being seen very clearly by someone who had looked very carefully. When she finished, Douglas said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You've been watching this company." "I've been watching the market," she said. "Your company was in the market." He looked at his hands on the table. "And the rest of it," he said. "This was also about—" "The analysis stands on its own," she said. "I would have made this offer regardless of who the seller was." She paused. "But I won't tell you the other thing didn't matter. It mattered enough that I've been carrying it for 15 years and examining it carefully enough to know that it didn't change the numbers." He looked at her. "You put me on that porch," she said, "in November, at 17, with 43 pounds and a zip bag." The conference room was entirely quiet. Outside, a crane was moving something far above the street, a faint mechanical sound that came and went. "I know," he said. 2 words. Not an explanation. Not an apology. Just an acknowledgement that the fact was real. She had not expected an apology. She had not come for one. "The offer stands," she said. "The terms are in the folder. I'd like your response by the 14th. She closed the folder. She stood. She looked at Tobena. "I hope you'll stay on," she said. "The client relationships you've managed, I've read the files. You're the reason half this portfolio is still intact." Tobena looked at her and said nothing, and then said, "Thank you." She looked, last, at Douglas Nwosu. He was sitting in the way a man sits when the furniture around him has changed while he was looking elsewhere. She said, "Take care of yourself, Douglas." Then she picked up the folder and walked out. He signed on the 14th. The acquisition completed 39 days later. Nkechi spent the first 3 months restructuring the operational systems, the spreadsheets replaced, the client records migrated, the processes documented in a way that meant the value lived in the firm and not in any one person's institutional memory. She brought on 2 new analysts. She kept Tobena and gave him the title he had been doing the work of for 4 years without holding. She renegotiated the Canary Wharf lease at terms that reflected a tenant who had options, which she did. She kept nothing of the old office except one thing, a small cactus on the windowsill of what had been Douglas's office and was now the junior analyst's workspace. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember. Nobody knew who had planted it. It had outlasted several management structures and at least 2 rounds of redecorating, and it had apparently been doing fine without much attention, which Nkechi found admirable. She called her mother in the 2nd week of March. Constance had left Tiverton Road 4 years after Nkechi had. She lived now in a small flat in Lewisham, not far from where Adeze had kept house in Lewisham, though they had never met, and she worked part-time at a community center on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She had been, for 4 years, the kind of quiet and her own. She and Nkechi had been speaking again since Nkechi was 26, slowly at first, in the way people speak when they are rebuilding something that fell, and they are not sure yet which pieces are usable. Carefully, with time between the conversations. "I wanted to tell you something," Nkechi said. "Tell me," said her mother. She told her. On the other end of the line, her mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father would have loved this. Not the acquisition, the manner of it, the preparation of it, the notebook, if she had known about the notebook." And Ketchy was standing at the window of her flat in Bermondsey. She was looking at the street. On the shelf behind her, the tin box sat in its place. The photograph, the letter, the empty space where 43 pounds had been, and which was now just the shape of what had been there. "I know," she said. Douglas Nwosu had put her on that porch believing he was closing something. He was, in fact, beginning something. He simply wasn't the one beginning it. That is the thing about the decision to push someone out with nothing. You cannot control what they build with the nothing you gave them. You cannot decide on a Thursday night in November that a 17-year-old girl with a tin box and 43 pounds is finished. You can close your door. You can turn off your porch light. You can go back inside and watch television and tell yourself that this was the right thing. But you cannot make it the end of her story. You can only make it the beginning of a chapter you were not meant to be in. And Ketchy did not build what she built because of Douglas. She built it because of her father's notebooks, and Nana's soup, and Gerald Bright's yellow legal pad, and 47 pages of her own handwriting at a kitchen table. And the specific fury of a girl who had been told by the shape of a door closing that she was not enough, and who had decided, on the pavement outside, in the cold, with her breath visible, that this was the most useful piece of information she had ever been given. Some people are handed a beginning and call it an ending. Some people are handed an ending and build everything from there. The difference between them is not talent, and it is not luck, and it is not what they were given. It is what they decided to do with the one thing nobody can take: the notebook, the record. The evidence of a mind that kept working, kept watching, kept believing that the numbers would eventually tell a different story, and that when they did, she would be ready to read it. Here is the question I want to leave you with. If someone shut a door on you at the moment you had the least, not your worst moment, but your most alone one, and you had to carry that moment with you for 15 years, what did you build with it? Or if you haven't been handed that moment yet, what are you building right now, quietly, in the evenings, at the kitchen table, that the people who underestimated you don't know exists yet? Leave that answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world underestimates until they walk back through the door. That is what this channel is for. I'll see you in the next one.